So we're going to look at factoring. Okay, factoring is another way to solve your quadratic equation. Obviously, you've got the quadratic formula. That's probably the safest way to do it. This is a little bit shorter and can save you some time though. So whenever you're doing this, it's got the steps there, 1 through 4, on how to factor. The first thing, which is the same as the quadratic formula, you need to make sure that you have it set equal to 0. That's a step a lot of people forget. So for example, on number 2, the first thing we're going to have to do is subtract 2x and subtract 15. Once you have it equal to 0, you're going to look for the greatest common factor. You'll pull that out, and then you'll actually do the factoring process, and then you'll solve for each variable. Okay. You need to know that whenever you see the word solve, your answer needs to be x equals. You're solving for x. And I'll explain the difference if you're just asked to factor versus if you're asked to solve by factoring, which a lot of times you'll be asked to solve. Now, there are a couple of special situations that I want you to try to recognize whenever you see them. And we're going to kind of write the steps of those up there. Now the first one, so looking at number 1, and that no C, no B situation, that's all based off of the ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so on number 1, what term am I missing, the b or the c? The c. Okay, so whenever you don't have the c value, all you have to look for is the greatest common factor, and you're done. What is the greatest common factor between 4x squared and negative 12x? Nope. 4 is part of it. Do what, Gavin? 4x. Good job, Gavin. Okay? So, I'm going to take that 4x out, and inside I'm left with x minus 3. Does everybody see how I'm left with x minus 3? So think about what we just did is the opposite of distribution. If I was to distribute that back in, I'm going to end up with 4x squared minus 12x. All I did is I pulled a 4x off of that one and a 4x off of that one. And I put it in the front. 4x squared divided by 4x is just x. Negative 12x divided by 4x is negative 3. But even if you have one that does not have that leading coefficient, at the very least, you'll be able to pull out x. And the big thing, I have a lot of students, or have had a lot of students, where they're not for sure if they're done factoring or not. Okay, they get through a step and they don't know if they're done. Is there more to do? Whenever you no longer have any exponents, you're done factoring. Okay, so that's kind of the key. That can kind of tell you, okay, I'm done. And then now I can solve it. So I take each factor, 4x and x minus 3, I set them both equal to 0. 0 divided by 4 is 0. 0 plus 3 is 3. Looking at number 2. So on number 2, what's the first thing we're going to need to do? Do what, Gavin?
Equal to
0. Okay, so I'm going to set it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 2x, and I'm going to subtract 15. Now on this one, I've got my a, I've got my b, I've got my c, so there is no shortcut. Do I have a greatest common factor? No, no greatest common factor. So this is going to be the factoring process here. All right, I'm going to take my a value, which is what? Do what, Daniel? Lucky you. Alright, so I'm going to do 1, my A value, times my C value, which is negative 15. After that, I need to figure out what factors of negative 15 add up to negative 2. What two numbers multiply to get to negative 15 but add up to negative 2? Okay, so you get negative 5 and 3. So I'm going to have x minus 5 and x plus 3. And then once I have that, I set each one of those equal to 0 and I solve. Does everyone see where she got negative 5 and 3? Let's kind of walk through it real quick. So I've got negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. So that checks that box off. Come on. Negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So that checks that one off. Okay. Coming down here to 3. So am I missing a term? Which term am I missing? Oh. Almost knocked Julia out. Sorry, Julia. Okay. So I don't have a B term. This is a no C situation. Okay. Now if you look up, this is what is called the difference of squares. Okay, you can write that if you want. Because both of those are perfect squares. 25 is a perfect square. X squared is a perfect square. Now a lot of times whenever you see this, don't write this down. You're going to see it represented as a squared minus b squared. I don't like that with the way I technically teach it, because I just told you that there's no b term, but now I'm telling you about b squared. Well, in the actual equation, you have your a term and you have your c term. So I teach the difference of squares as a squared minus c squared, because that's what's actually in the formula, or in the equation. So whenever you have that, your answer is going to be a plus c and a minus c. And so what that means we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both the first and the second term in that equation, and we're going to do a plus c and a minus c. So my a squared is x squared, which what is the square root of x squared? X. What is the square root of 25? 5. So my c is 5, and I'm going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. Difference of squares. Square root both of them. A plus c, a minus c. So that x minus 5 gives me positive 5. X plus 5 gives me negative 5. Looking down at 4. 4 is a little bit different. Okay, I've got my A, B, and C. There is no greatest common factor. So I go straight to doing the triangle thing. So my A times my C value is going to be what? Do what?
Negative 6x squared.
No. My A times my C is going to be what? Just negative 6. Good job, Meredith. So what factors of negative 6 add up to positive 5? What factors of negative 6 add up to positive 5?
3 and 2.
Nope, not negative 3 and 2.
3 and 2.
Nope. Nope. Do what? You got one of them right. It's what, Julia? Positive 6 and negative 1. There is no combination of 3 and 2 that's going to give you both. Positive 3 plus 2 is 5, but 3 times 2 is positive 6, not negative 6. Okay? Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6, but negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. So you've got to be very careful. Now, this problem is a little bit different than number 2. And it's all because it has a leading coefficient other than 1. On number 2, x squared just had 1 in front of it. This one does not. So whenever you have that leading coefficient, that adds one little step. I'm going to try to divide both of those factors by whatever that leading coefficient is. If this was 3x squared, I'd be dividing by 3. Then I try to see if they divide evenly. Does 6 divided by 2, does that come out evenly? Yes. Does 1 divided by 2 come out evenly? No. So I'm going to take that 2, and it becomes the coefficient of x. So whenever I solve this, what are my two solutions? Okay. Negative 3 and 1/2. I asked you for that because in my other two classes, I had a lot of people tell me that second factor, 2x minus 1, gave me positive 1. Okay, you cannot just ignore that part of the factor and think, well, okay, it's just negative 3, and well, that's just positive 1. Because up until this point, that's how they all worked out so far. Because none of those x's had a coefficient in front of it. So if it has that coefficient, you've got to pay attention to it, because it's going to affect the answer. Questions on any of that? I want you to turn over to the back. I want you to work number 6. And before you get too far into it, can somebody tell me what is the first thing you're going to have to do on number 6? You're going to have to add 48. And then once we're done with that one, I'll get you started on 7 and let you take over on it as well. All right, has anyone been able to find the factors of 48 that add up to negative 16? What are they? Negative 12 and negative 4. Which is going to give me 12, positive 12 and positive 4. On 7. So looking at 7, it's equal to 0. Does 7 have a greatest common factor? What is it? 4. So I'm going to have x squared minus 5x plus 6. So whenever you pull out that greatest common factor, and it's this situation, whenever you do that triangle, alright, you need to make sure that you're taking that the coefficient of x squared is 1. It's not 4. Okay, so you're going to have 1 times 6, which is 6. And you're going to come down What factors of 6 add up to negative 5? Negative 3 and negative 2. And so what are my two answers here? What is it, Gavin? And? Okay. Now I meant to point this out earlier, because I told you I would. But if all you're asked to do is to factor, you would go to that step and you would be done. Okay, if you're just asked to factor, you're going to get it into factored form, which that's what that is, and you're done with the problem. You have got to include that 4 in there. Okay, because if I multiply x minus 3 times x minus 2, it's not going to give me that original equation. It's got to have the 4 to get me there. If you were asked to solve, then you go that one extra step and get there. So make sure you know the difference. You read the instructions whenever you're doing those.